Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Rich Berliner, the publisher of Connected Real Estate Magazine, and I'm here today interviewing Albert Lee from Dali Wireless. Albert, you've got a full suite of DAS and building products, but you've got a really interesting history about how you got to that point. Can you tell us about that?
Thank you, Rich. I'm honored to be here today. Yes, Dali has been around for 13 years, officially incorporated, but Dali was, I would say it's been around probably for 14, 15 when in the process of thinking about launching it. And when we first started, we have some, I would say, innovations, revolutionary technologies in software radio. Right now, in today, it's probably everywhere, but at the time, it was very innovative.
And yeah, we used to call it software-defined radio. I remember we chatted about this. Our friend Vanu Bose had
that's correct.
That software-defined radio concept at the beginning. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's correct. That's just the predecessor. Software-defined radio is using software to generate to become RF signals. But what we have is the software to manipulate signals. A little bit different, but yes, so around the same thing. So by default, startup is supposed to disrupt industries, supposed to basically revolutionize with the latest technologies. And then my co-founder, Professor Sean Stapleton, and I basically saw the opportunities to disrupt the wireless infrastructure. And then we were going to put our technology in use, and we decided to come up with what we now called digital pre-distortion power amplifiers, which is very high efficiency and very high linearity. What that meant is that it can make the network perform much better using a lot less energy. So that was kind of how we started.
So you have a large suite of patents as a company. I thought it was very impressive, and that was one of the really interesting things about Dali. Tell us about that.
Yes, thank you. So in order to build a large patent portfolios, you need lots of money and lots of time. So as a background, I am still a corporate and patents attorney. And before I started Dali, I was actually practicing startup and IP law at an international law firm in Silicon Valley. So on a daily basis, I actually advise most of my startup clients, and then on a daily basis, how to protect their intellectual properties and ideas. So that is kind of how I learned how to do it. And then in the early days of Dali, when we were developing our product, so we have lots of time. So you got myself, and basically a lawyer. When we have a professor, and what do? We file lots of IP, and that is how we did it. Over time, it grew and now grew up to about almost 500 patents worldwide.
Interesting. And so you've had some choppiness with those patents along the way. Tell us about that.
What do you mean by choppiness?
Well, you've had an interesting lawsuit of recently that you won, and I thought that was something that our viewers would want to hear about.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, thank you very much. So in most of the technology companies, essentially the crown jewel is the IP, because that is where kind of I would say, inventions being embodied and also protected. And as a small company coming onto the scene, we made a lot of the large companies, especially large incumbents, very uncomfortable. And when we threaten their kind of market positions, and then typically would generate some kind of reactions. Sometimes they come out and offer you some, I would say, money to license your technologies or to buy your companies. And some of them were trying to eliminate you from the market. And in one case here, we actually were able to threaten, I would say, a really large incumbent, and then they decided that instead of taking the routes where they want to work with us, they're trying to kill us, and therefore they filed a lawsuit against us. But then I believe that the facts says it all. Justice been proven by the jury, and we're very happy about that.
Right. I wonder if they knew you were a patent attorney in the first place before they took you on with that.
Yes, I think they probably regretted it. I believe.
I'll say. By the way, how did the name Dali come about? That's one thing we didn't talk about.
Yes, it is pretty interesting because we also had another co-founder. His name is Dali Yang. And when we're gathering together, we were thinking about what name we should use. And we came up with a lot of names. Some of them just not too appropriate. Some of them were just, I would say, not too media catchy. And then we decided, hey, Dali Yang, you had a good name. Why don't we use your name? And besides that, when we looked into the NASDAQ, DALI was available as a stock ticker symbol. So we got to use that.
Right. So you are a public company?
No, we're not. We're a startup, but we aspire to become a public company.
So you want to use that name on the NASDAQ someday?
Correct.
Makes sense.
Correct. And I remember reading a report where at the time, if investors, we're talking about public investors, remember and recognize the stock symbols, you can the stocks typically does a little bit better.
Gotcha. So you've had an interesting flow from what you started with in terms of products and what you've come up with now, which is your product line. So can you give us a little bit of the chronology of where you came from? So you had this software-defined radio product early on that potentially needed to be installed in other people's base stations. You moved from that to something almost not completely different, but much more mature now. Tell us about that.
Yes, okay. It is quite a long story. Being a startup for 13 years, the company pivoted a few times, but that is what most successful companies do. We started, as mentioned, in the power amplifiers market, which is really a component, and going into somebody's kind of bigger systems. For that to be successful, there must be a merchant market, meaning that the bigger companies, system level companies is willing to buy from the merchant market, and at the same time is willing to adopt incorporate into the systems. And because we founded the company shortly after the telecom bubble, 2000, if you might remember, and the market was quite brutal. There was a lot of consolidations, and among the operators, among the OEM, the system vendors. So then we quickly realized that that is not really a viable market. Even at the time, we came out the first highest efficiency power amplifiers that basically, I would say shocked a lot of people. So when that happened, we decided to leverage the technology that we have and go up the value chain and provide system levels product. However, system levels product, basically a big box for the network, requires a lot more capital. And we had to go to look for funding. And then we approached the institutional investors, and then the institutional investors, and by then they were actually quite interested because of the success of the iPhone and the whole mobile data situation. And then we presented them with a business plan, and what they said was, hey, you needed something that is a little bit more exciting, something that can basically one day get onto the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So we basically went back and huddled and see, okay, what kind of, I would say, solutions would be quite media catchy, as I said earlier. And we find out that at the time, actually, virtualization in the computing industry was the biggest and hottest topic. And then we look at actually what's happening in the radio access market. Hey, we can actually do the same thing. We can virtualize the radio access market and then provide IT-like solutions to the industry. So that is how Dali got funded and essentially go into the market.
Right. So instead of putting your component into their box, you kind of created the box around your component.
Correct.
And made something of it that way. And
correct.
That's interesting. It's almost like if you think about how Michael Dell started, he was trade show and got the components and put the computers together. That sounds a lot like what you did.
Exactly.
So tell us what Dali does today, what your focus is, and where you see the company going.
Yes. So very quickly, when we actually got funded and built kind of what we call a virtual RAN solution, and we're too early. This is basically about 8-9 years ago in 2010, 2011. So then, because the entire industry was deploying 4G LTE. Now, Dali is not a science, I would say, project. Dali is a fully funded commercial enterprise. So we have to look for revenues. So then we have to go back to the market to see, okay, what are the areas that we can make some revenues. And then we looked into, and then we saw the in-building wireless and more specifically the distributed antenna system, DAS, hey, there's actually opportunity there. We can apply our technology and make the next generation's digital DAS and make it much better, much more efficient, and with high capacity. And then the market likes it. And we actually came up with the first one called T-Series and become very successful. We deploy in lots of places. And then we also attack the public safety market. We find out that is another area of strong interest in the public wireless network. And then shortly after, we came up with the next generations, which is called Matrix. And Matrix is kind of a follow-on of the T-Series, where we deploy everywhere globally.
Right. Are you working on a private LTE sort of CBRS set of components too?
Yes, that's definitely something we're actively working on. And this is also, I believe personally, this is going to be the future in terms of the private network.
Albert, are you about to play in the data center market in addition to the other things that you're doing now and the CBRS piece? Are you looking at the data center market?
Yes, basically how we envision for a long time, even when we first getting into venture capital funding, the whole network would just be like cloud computing. Like today, if somebody at home, your family will watch movies, they do not go to Blockbuster anymore to rent a DVD. They would just, turn on the TV and turn on Netflix and download and stream. So at the back end of that is basically all the videos, the movies coming from the data center, more like a kind of on-demand type of model. The same thing, I really believe that the whole radio access network will go towards that model. Is in a sense is no matter how much capacities and data that you need, and we just go through the data center, and then it will go down to stream down to your home or the venues. For that to happen, you basically need the entire network solutions in a virtualized format, just like the IT will. And that's how Dali, again, the original vision. So with that, Dali has a what we call virtual front haul solution, and then the equipment is called VFI in short. And essentially, that's a software radio router, and the router will route the signals from the data centers to all the radiating points in the home, on the street, and everywhere. And that is also kind of the piece that can virtualize the network. Why? Because we turn from a two-tier network solutions, meaning originally the base station, a baseband, to the RF radiating point. We basically cut the cord and then insert a radio router there. Then all of a sudden, we can have any kinds of software, any kinds of signals from the baseband side inside a data center can route to anywhere out there, just kind of like how the internet is.
Interesting.
That is the future.
Albert, I think it's really interesting what you're doing. We're big supporters of yours, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today because you have a really interesting company. And I know it hasn't been a flash in the pan overnight success, but like anything in this world, something this important is worth staying with. So thank you again for being here.
Yes, thank you, Rich. It's an honor to be here today.